G'day, welcome to Digger History. My name's Keith and I'm your host. If you have been following this podcast for a while, you may notice a slight change to the title. It used to be called Digger History. I've renamed it Digger History, Australia's Military Heritage. That's because I wanted to make the title a bit more self-explanatory to those of us that aren't sure what the word digger means. So to an Australian, the word digger is obviously an Australian soldier. It's a word that's been used since at least as far back as World War I, potentially longer. But I've realised that the word digger isn't as obvious in its meaning around the world, and considering that there's more and more of an international audience listening to this podcast, I felt the need to make the title a bit more self-explanatory, so we don't have people like tuning into the podcast thinking it's a podcast about front-end loaders or people that dig for mines or something like that. I've added the words Australia's military heritage. I wanted to keep the word digger history in there, but just add to it. So that's the reason for the change. Now, I also want to start a new kind of series in this podcast that I'll be doing every month, and it's about what's happened in this month in military history, in Australian military history. So the first month being August, this is the first episode in that series. So today I'll be talking about what's happened in Australian military history in August. Now, this isn't an extensive list of everything that's happened in history. Just a few key moments, a few key events, and also I won't be going into great depth in every event. Just more of a broad kind of heads up that these things happened. These significant events happened in Australian military history in this month. So welcome to the first month, August. So in this episode I'll be talking about some key things that have happened in August in Australia's military history. I hope you enjoy this new kind of series I'm doing. Don't forget to like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, add some comments in there. I love seeing comments. I love seeing new followers, new viewers. So please do so. It really helps. So here we go, August in Australian military history. So on the 4th of August 1914, Australia entered World War I. It was the same day that Britain entered World War I. Shortly after Britain declared war on Germany, Australia also declared war on Germany. Throughout the next 4 and a bit years, 416,000 Australians served in the First World War. Australia was only a relatively young country at the time. In fact, Federation Australia only became Australia from the states federating in 1901. So it was a very young country at the time, and throughout the next 4 years committed a relatively huge proportion of its population to the First World War. The 5th of August 1944 was the Cowra Breakout. So Cowra in central western New South Wales was home to a prisoner of war camp which housed Japanese, Italian and German prisoners. 1,100 Japanese prisoners made a mass breakout from the Cowra prison camp. They had makeshift weapons made of baseball bats and other improvised weapons, and they stormed the barbed wire fences under heavy machine gun fire. 231 Japanese prisoners died. Many of them actually took their own lives because they didn't want to be recaptured. 4 Australian soldiers were killed, including 2 machine gunners that were posthumously awarded the George Cross. After they were overrun, they actually took the bolt from the machine guns and threw them away so that the machine guns couldn't be turned on their own men. The Cowra Breakout was the only land battle of World War II that was fought directly on Australian soil. The 6th of August 1915 was the start of the Battle of Lone Pine, one of, I guess, the more well-known battles of the Gallipoli campaign. And I guess most Australians probably would have heard of the Battle of Lone Pine. It was actually a diversionary attack meant to draw the Ottoman reserves away from a planned British breakout further north. The diggers charged across no man's land, and some pretty heavy combat took place over the next 4 days. Hand-to-hand combat with bayonets and just even bare-handed combat. The Australians suffered 2,200 casualties, and there were 7,000 Ottoman casualties. Seven Victoria Crosses were awarded to Australians for the events of Lone Pine. The 7th of August 1915, another well-known battle at Gallipoli that Australians were involved in, probably not as well known as Lone Pine, was the charge at the Neck. This was another diversionary assault, and the whole battlefield was about the size of a tennis court. The 3rd Australian Light Horse were the soldiers that charged at the Neck. Without their horses, they'd left their horses behind. There was no point taking them to Gallipoli. And a naval bombardment was supporting them, but a timing error led to the bombardment being stopped too soon, giving the Ottomans a chance to get back in their trenches and get their machine guns up and going again. So 4 waves of Australian troops charged across this battlefield into heavy machine gun fire. The whole battle lasted just 15 minutes, and 372 Australian casualties, including 234 killed in this tragic charge. On the 8th of August 1918 was the Battle of Amiens. Now this is where I have a bit of a struggle with pronunciation, not because I can't pronounce the towns, but I've heard various different pronunciations. But the one I'm going to go with is Amiens. That's the one I hear it pronounced most of all. So Amiens is a town it was on the Western Front in France, and this was part of a big Allied offensive that ended up permanently breaking the deadlock of trench warfare. So for years, trench warfare was like the front didn't move much at all. This was a big planned offensive planned by Australian General Sir John Monash, using like combined arms, modern warfare, using infantry, artillery, tanks and aircraft together. So on day one of this offensive, the Allies pushed 11 kilometres into German territory. And this is what the day that was quoted by German General Erich Ludendorff, who called this the Black Day of the German Army. So we're going to move now to the 15th of August 1945, Victory in the Pacific Day, or VP Day. That is the day that Japan surrendered to the Allies in World War II and officially ended the war. The 18th of August 1966 was the Battle of Long Tan. This is probably, the name is probably quite well known to Australians. Amongst the battles that Australians were involved in Vietnam, this is probably the most well known. So 108 men of Delta Company 6 RAR were essentially ambushed and pinned down by over 2,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. Delta Company was sent out into the Long Tan rubber plantation on patrol, following a mortar attack on the Nui Dat base the night before. So the battle took place inside a rubber plantation in torrential monsoon rain, with really bad visibility. The New Zealand artillery at Nui Dat provided essential artillery support. In fact, extremely close artillery support. Also, RAAF helicopters supported with ammunition drops. And all this through like torrential monsoon rains. 18 Australians were killed, and 245 enemy were found dead on the field. The date 18th of August is commemorated by Australians as Vietnam Veterans Day. On the same day, the 18th of August in 1971, so 5 years after the Battle of Long Tan, the Australian government announced the withdrawal of troops from Vietnam. Nearly 60,000 Australians had served in Vietnam. Between the 21st and 27th of August 1915, going back to Gallipoli now, was the Battle of Hill 60, and this was the final attempt to break the Gallipoli deadlock, and to link all the Allied positions at Suvla and ANZAC. So a mixed force of Australian, British, New Zealand and Indian troops charged a heavily fortified Hill 60. They were devastated by machine gun fire. There was once again brutal hand-to-hand combat and trench warfare, and the attack ended up failing. And the Gallipoli campaign was once again in a stalemate until the evacuation of the Allies. The 25th of August 1942 was the Battle of Milne Bay in New Guinea. So Japanese naval forces landed on the eastern tip of New Guinea in Milne Bay to seize the ground for to build airstrips in support of an invasion of Port Moresby. The Japanese underestimated the size of the Allied forces at Milne Bay, comprised of Australian militia, so Australian Reserve soldiers, AIF soldiers, and US engineers. The battle actually went for 2 weeks, fought in jungle, with knee deep mud, and monsoon rain. RAAF Kitty Hawk fighter bombers attacked the Japanese ground troops, and this ended up being the first time an Imperial Japanese land assault was decisively defeated in World War II. And on the 31st of August 1918, we're going back to the Western Front now in World War I, the Battle of Mont St. Quentin. So this was a heavily fortified hill that was defended by the Germans, and 3 Australian battalions were given the task of taking this hill. Now this was kind of a bit of a bluff. The Australian battalions were quite understrength, and they made a lot of noise firing on the run, banging mess tins, making a lot of noise just to make it sound like they were like a lot bigger force than what they were. And it was sheer aggressiveness that won out, and the Australians took the hill. So there you go. That's August in Australian military history. As I said, there are other events, many other events. So these are just a handful of events that happened in Australian military history, but these are some of the standout ones that I wanted to mention in this episode. Each one of these events would be a podcast episode in itself. Like I said, my intention for this episode is not to go into every one of these things in depth, just to kind of give a bit of a what happened this month in history. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. I'm planning on making this a regular thing each month, going through a few things that happened in Australian military history throughout the month. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, share the episode with anyone you think might find it of interest. And thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.